Welcome to the Arbortext Monster Garage. With Arbortext in your tool chest, you can do anything. Hello and welcome. I'll be subbing in for the person who was originally slotted to speak today. They've given us permission to share their stories with you. We're going to talk about some lessons that are learned in the Windchill environment. Before we go too far, I want to let you know that our stories you're about to hear are from real customers, either of Windchill or Acm. And none of them used our services for the Windchill or Acm implementation. It is just the way that works sometimes, and you always get what you're paid for. Hopefully after today's session you'll have seen enough stories that you'll be able to avoid problems in the future. So we've got some advice and some war stories. Start with the advice. That's the good stuff first. Don't lose a day's worth of work. One customer had an individual pull a model that turned out to be early in the development cycle, according to their Windchill workflows. They lost about a day's worth of work from another illustrator because of this. So always their advice was to make sure that you set up Windchill so that it will delete objects from the workspace on check-in. Old habits die hard. Be patient, be strong. It's going to take users a little time to get used to this, especially tech pubs folks. They're not used to having their work checked in frequently or having peer review. So just give them some time, be patient, they'll be strong, and they'll get used to it. You know, they're used to clicking what's easier than clicking file open. Well, one of the things you can do is you can use queries to help enforce compliance, so you can't just do file open. The queries themselves really are very useful, handy tools in Windchill. One customer trained their users on the process, and then they went and did a follow-up to see who had tested things and that they were supposed to test and who had tried the new processes, and they couldn't get a clear answer as to who had done what or whether they'd tested things. So they implemented some Windchill queries that let them check up on the users to see if they were doing things properly. And so then they went around a second time and said, hey, we want you to test these things again. We want you to try it out, use the process. And by the way, we're going to be checking up on you because we've implemented things that will let us audit what you're doing and do that. And they found out that everyone tested and did what they were supposed to do. So those are you can use queries to do that kind of thing. More things, be patient. I have to say that a couple times actually. For one customer, they're using the workgroup integration in Windchill, and it's still fairly fresh for them. They say they've hit a number of problems that have been addressed in later releases, disappearing files, failed check-ins, things like that, fairly basic bug issues with Windchill. And but they're looking at upgrading to 10, and if you haven't already, they tell us, as we have recommended, that now is a pretty good time to upgrade. None of the existing bugs that they've been aware of over the last 9.0 and 9.1 are in the latest release, which is a good sign for everyone. Also, one thing to do is sometimes you have to start with a clean slate. And this is not, you have to uninstall Windchill and start and install it again from scratch. That's not what we're talking about. But in the case of the Workgroup Manager, that has to be updated with Windchill, and it's kind of a minor annoyance because it's an additional update, but it is one that the users can do, and you don't have to have the admins do it. As a note, they found that it's always better to uninstall the previous version before installing the newer one. The last time they had 14 people upgrade, and 2 failed before they figured out finally to uninstall and then reinstall, and that solved the problem. You can do a lot of good stuff with Windchill. You can put everything in its place. By that I mean think of what you need to do. One customer suggested that to the technical committees that a nice addition would be to allow a macro to run during check-in. Currently they've implemented a publish macro that does some file manipulation. It moves all their exported files into the proper locations, and they're looking at ways to have this run when check-in is selected. So there's all kinds of things you can do. Windchill is pretty configurable, it's customizable, but it's also a lot of things are configurable. And really, advice is easy, but it's the war stories that tell you what's going on. And we're going to talk about the difference between configuration and customization and sort of the impact that that can have, especially when you're dealing with adding Arbortext to an engineering or CAD-driven Windchill implementation. So there are easy fixes and there are hard fixes, and you don't always know which is which. And worse, you don't always know if you found everything, but I'll come back to that in a minute. In one case, we found that some very simple things that should work out of the box in Windchill just didn't work, like full text search. There's no two-way metadata for XML documents, and there was nothing for Office documents. Backups hadn't been set up ever. They'd been installed with dependencies on software that no one in-house had been trained to manage. And it had been pretty much turned into a glorified file system that this customer had ended up developing scripts and going around the back end to do things they wanted to do because they didn't have the training and to handle that another way. And they just needed behavior that had never been configured in the first place. And when they saw end of life approaching for the version of Windchill that they're on today, they started thinking about upgrading, and it was pretty much forget it. They didn't know enough to do it, and they had no experience or anything to do it. The fixes for that situation were, there were a lot of little things to fix. They were very discrete small bits, luckily, and they were all configuration based, and most of it was handled through mentoring. But there were lots of little pieces here and there, like turning on the indexing for full text search and restarting the indexer, adding bursting rules and to a metadata, configuring that, and adding new metadata information on the Windchill detail screens. It's fairly simple to set up, but you need to know that you need to do it in advance. So it's a little, but they're all little breakable things that you can handle on a small scale. In another case, we had a CAD-driven Windchill implementation that was ready to start integrating their tech pubs team. And when they got around to checking the in XML data, they could check it in, but they couldn't check in graphic files, and they discovered they couldn't create published representations of the XML content. Now, both of those things are built in Windchill out of the box, and so it was very sort of difficult to figure out, what had been configured and where. And they'd had a Windchill competency in-house. They had a guy who was taking over ownership in their IT department of Windchill, but he is not, is not in any way a Windchill expert. But they'd hired a consulting company who specialized in CAD-driven Windchill implementations to do the work. And these guys are great at Windchill, absolutely, hands down. They're very good at what they do, and they're especially good at CAD integration, which is really the primary driver for this installation when it was done. So, but they'd also made decisions that were rational, reasonable, and very well thought out for a CAD implementation of Windchill at the time. So when it came around for tech pubs to get involved, they hadn't had anyone from tech pubs on the implementation team. They didn't have experience with technical publications. The consulting team, the consulting company who is CAD-driven and engineering-driven, they're not familiar with tech pubs and tech pubs processes and tech pubs requirements. And that's sometimes how it happens. They're engineering. They're not thinking about content from an organizational or enterprise perspective. They're thinking of solving the CAD, PLM integration problem that they were hired to do. So if you get wind that something's going on in engineering, get involved and stay involved. Don't just let them throw it over the fence. Even if you have a consulting company working with you, get involved. Now, this is something that, we require involvement. It's not optional because we have to turn it over to somebody. If they don't require it from you, you need to require it from them. And ultimately, that involvement is part of what's getting their problem fixed, what's getting their situation recovered. The system that they acquired from the consulting company was undocumented. They didn't know what they had done or how they'd done it, what had been configured out or in. They're waiting on that information. Months later, they've asked the consulting company to tell them what they've done, and ultimately, that's what they've asked us to come in and validate and verify. They want to know what pieces make Windchill Arbortext ready. It turns out there's a lot of digging involved, looking at every corner of the system, looking for time bombs. It's kind of like a game of Minesweeper there. You never know when you're going to find some setting that has implication that the implementer didn't necessarily consider. Windchill has a lot of ways it can be configured and deployed, and when you're adapting an implementation that was done originally from a CAD-driven perspective, you're going to find several points where, say, an OIR is imported from another system, or it's configured based on CAD-driven implementation experience, but you'll find that it didn't take Arbortext into consideration, and you end up shooting yourself in the foot. These are stories from the configuration side. These are things that a lot of the stuff can be configured, can just be solved through small configuration investigation and fix. We're talking, half day or less number of hours to get it fixed, from anywhere from 1 to 4, really. And but there's other sides too, right? Windchill is also extremely customizable. So picture it. We've got a long time and continually customized Windchill environment, kind of like plastic surgery addicts, right? You've pushed and pulled and pulled and re-pulled and pulled again, and it doesn't quite, it still resembles what it's supposed to be, but it's very different from what it was. And the implementation for this customer had been done years and years ago. It was engineering, it was CAD focused. They were one of the lucky few who had grown a Windchill expert in-house, and he was extremely good. He knew things that PTC would learn from even. So he had them, they were on each other's speed dial. They were ready, though, to add a brand new out-of-the-box Arbortext install to the mix. They were just trying out the tools. They had not done documentation analysis. They were not doing style sheets. They just wanted to integrate Arbortext and make sure it would all work, and then go down that path and configure that environment. And it turned out that when they added the out-of-the-box Arbortext handling to Windchill, they discovered a couple of things. The Arbortext representations came back as separately life-cycled objects, which was not at all desirable for them. They didn't want to track life cycle on the PDFs. They just wanted to track the life cycle of the XML files, right? Because PDF is just a representation, just like the HTML or the French or the Spanish. They're all representations of the source. Finding the fix for it was not really very easy to pin down. In a customized environment, which is what this was, the PTC documentation will only take you so far, right? The solution turned out to be a mix of very specific and very general changes that were required to code that affected the long-term standing engineering objects. It didn't change the way engineering objects were handled, because that had been well tested, well set for several years. They didn't want to change how it was handled, but you had to let Windchill know that these things were different kinds of objects, and they needed to lock down how the behavior happened in order to accommodate what was desired with respect to the new Arbortext objects and the Arbortext representations. So there's a lot of little things here, a lot of digging involved, a lot of pieces to find, and a lot of almost like whack-a-mole. You knock one down and find another one later on thinking you're done. Kind of smell a book coming on. So remember, here are the big lessons learned, things to remember. If you've initiated an installation, think of your configuration from all aspects, including tech hubs. This means if you're brand new, get involved and stay involved, and don't let them just hand you something and go. If you're being integrated, first check and make sure that everything that's Arbortext requirements for features and behavior isn't killed. If it has, fix that first. If they're doing PDM link, make sure these kinds of things that we've been talking about here don't happen, because you will be using some of it. And again, if you're new, make sure they don't kill anything. If your future growth is to include tech pubs and you catch wind that this is going on, make sure you're there and you can help make the situation better from the beginning. So we're right here at the 15-minute mark, so we got 10 minutes left for questions. I'll put up the slide for resources for Arbortext users. Remember that we're a big community and very tight and lots of things to go on. And you can, all of these resources are available just to click live from the URL at the bottom. There's Arbortext mailing lists and code repositories, blogs, podcasts, lots of community to get members. And, we'd love to have you join all of it. Let's see, do we have any questions? I know this is not our usual kind of Monster Garage. I don't see any questions. We'll give it a couple of more minutes, see if anybody has anything. In the meantime, next session, Brandon, do you remember what our next session is? I forgot to note that down.
No, not offhand. Let me see if I can check the schedule here real quick.
All right. Some general advice, things to remember. Windchill is becoming more easy to use and deploy. Here's a first question. Will Arbortext work with other PDM like EPDM? Is EPDM, is that you're talking about the module from Windchill, or is that actually another non-PTC product? If our question answerer can update their question. It's the DSS SolidWorks software. So Arbortext should work. Arbortext doesn't really care, quite frankly. Arbortext doesn't care what content management system you're using. It has a long history, actually, of working with other pieces, and Windchill came along much later in the Arbortext life cycle. So the integrations, however, with other EPDM software or CMS content management systems, there are only few adapters that are supported by PTC. That's Documentum, IBM's DB2, Oracle, SDK. Those are the only three that are supported. I know there's one by Astoria that they wrote and has some limited support for, but Astoria does it. There probably isn't any, I'm sure there's no worker and integration for the DSS software. However, that doesn't mean if you've got workspaces and you've got your TechPubs team using those workspaces and they know how to check in and check out files, that you can't do that. As far as publishing goes, the creation of representation, like your PDF or your CHM or any of those things, those things will all work because you can publish from the desktop client Arbortext editor. You don't have to do it through the content management system. I don't know how you extend DSS SolidWorks, but if you can extend it, you should be able to send requests to the publishing engine because that's what all the other adapters do. Just may take some work on that side, but neither one is necessary.
Speaking for myself, I actually worked on a project that we integrated with a custom content management solution that there was not support built into Arbortext for, and we just scripted Arbortext from the outside. So our system actually ran Arbortext rather than Arbortext interfacing to the content management system.
Right. There's lots of ways to do it.
Check-ins, check-outs, and we launched the editor externally when we needed to, and did some work with ACL and so on to interface with it as needed.
That's true. That was actually very slick. Doable. Yeah, it was very slick. So I wouldn't worry about that. Really, you can think of them as independent pieces if you want to. We got another question. Do I have some stories about Acm implementations? Not usually, because Acm implementation has all the Arbortext stuff built into it. That's the whole point of it. An ACM is actually a pared down version of Windchill. So what they've done with ACM is they've cut out all the CAD support, all the things that CAD needs, all the engineering stuff, and it's really just focused on Arbortext and Arbortext requirements. So from an implementation and configuration perspective, ACM is fine. Like there's no hiccups for that. The couple of stories I was talking about though early on, which were getting full text search set up and backup set up and those little configuration stories, that actually is an ACM implementation story. They didn't have everything configured at the time of installation, and they did a lot of scripting around the back end because they lost their Windchill person. He had it all in his head and he left. So the only story I would say, really biggest lesson learned from that is don't let just one person learn how to use it and maintain it and run and administer the system. You really need backup people, and you need to have that all documented. Because when he left, there was nobody left who could run Oracle. They were all SQL guys, and there was nobody left who who had been through the training. They were gone. They just didn't know what to do. So there's some things there, but those are for ACM. functionality-wise, you don't see any problems. For small features and small configurable stuff, you might see things left out, but it's pretty easy to turn that stuff back on. So hopefully that answers your 2 questions. Let me know if it does or does not. Let's see if we get any more questions.
Meantime, the next session for the garage is going to be 2 weeks from today on the 14th of October, and that's actually me talking about the startup sequence, how to customize the whole process that Arbortext go through when it starts, how to incorporate any customizations that are specific to your dock type or to your environment, and kind of the whole process.
Excellent. That would be good. I love that one. It's funny because people keep asking us about that. All right. Well, I don't see any more questions. That's right. I don't see any more questions. I will give it a couple of more seconds here. If you've got some, type it in. And otherwise, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Startup sequence customization. You don't want to miss that. That's always key to keep your writers in check and doing what they're supposed to do. All right. Then we'll go. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks.